The only link with survival passed through time. A loophole in time, and then maybe it would be possible to reach food, medicine, energy. This was the purpose of the experiment, to throw emissaries into time, to call past and future to the rescue of the present.
Oh boy, it's a time travel podcast. My name is Nate, and someday we'll explore the origin of my co-host, Brian Martin.
Yeah, the mysterious origins of Brian.
How you doing this evening?
Doing well.
Yeah.
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
You guys get more winter weather this week?
Cold. It's cold.
Yeah,
we didn't get any of the snow and stuff.
We got some snow. We got some good snow. In fact, they canceled school yesterday, which is always fucking great. Snow didn't start until about 3, and then there was a 2-hour delay today, and the snow didn't start today until like 9 in the morning, which is when I was walking my kid to school. So we're walking through the snow, and one of the people at the school, as I dropped him off, was like, I think they canceled school on the wrong day. Saying, yeah, I think they did.
So
they did.
That's cool. You can walk your kid to school?
Yeah, I do walk him to school. Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
now we can officially say that we walk to school in the snow.
In both ways.
Is, one of those time-honored traditions.
Nice.
You know you're still American.
All right, let me pour out the whiskey here, and we can...
Oh, you got whiskey?
Yeah, we can get started.
I don't have any whiskey tonight, but I did bring the olives.
Oh, you've got the olives.
I do have some olives tonight.
I passed on the olives tonight, so good thing that one of us had them.
I'm really hungry, man.
Me, not so much. Not tonight. That's why I was thinking, well, I could eat olives just for the sake of the podcast, but it didn't feel right.
As long as one of us has olives.
You've got the olives. Yeah, it's working out.
Got to maintain continuity.
Working out just fine.
One of these days we'll do like a highlight episode, and then one moment it'll be you eating olives, and the next moment it'll be me eating olives, and it'll be like, well, this was obviously cobbled together.
Maybe we should just do an all-olive podcast at some point.
All-olive podcast. Get some Mount Olive olives, get some Tuscan Garden olives, do a blind taste test.
Well,
this is the kind of content people show up to listen to.
Yeah, I was wondering how much people care about the olives. Probably not as much as we do, but...
I wonder how much people care about the content this week. No, how familiar they are. I love the stuff we're talking about this week.
Okay.
And it is weird and unique, and I do believe a lot of it is stuff that people haven't been exposed to.
Right, and that would be one of my concerns, is that some of it may be difficult to find.
Okay, but I've thought about this.
Uh-huh.
With each title that we're talking about, I am going to be including some information about where you can find it.
Good.
And how to lock it down. In general, the theme this week, guys, we've talked in previous episodes about some of the inspirations that filmmakers and screenwriters had when they made certain things. I'm thinking of Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys. I'm thinking of Time Crimes, right?
Mm-hmm. Chrononauts?
And this week... No, I'm not thinking of Chrononauts. Although there are some comics this week, guys. So what we're doing is going back and looking at some of the inspirations from some of those previous pieces of media we talked about. And we're starting by talking about the 1962 French short film La Jetée, which I talked about previously on the, I want to say... the episode where we talked about Timeless Christmas.
Amber, it's not Shakespeare.
I think I mentioned it on Timeless Christmas.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, maybe so.
Because it was right after our 12 Monkeys episode, and I kind of went back and checked out La Jetée, which was the inspiration for 12 Monkeys.
This is right up there with you saying that 19th century speculative fiction is your jam.
It is.
You open this with...
French New Wave experimental short films is my jam.
From 1962. A 1962 short French film for our time travel podcast. I'm going to say one of probably the stupidest things I've said on this podcast.
You don't know where France is.
No. I know it's in Europe somewhere.
Maybe it's on the water. I don't know.
Well, La Jetée if I'm not mistaken, translates almost directly to...
Oh, the pier. Jetée is like jetty
I just...
in southern U.S. parlance. So the pier in question is the observation deck at the airport.
Right. So I feel like a lot of foreign films use one-word titles that in the United States would be like...
I thought you were going to say, a lot of foreign films use these fancy words that might make
well,
sense
that's what
in their
I'm driving
language,
at.
but in America...
I'm wondering if they think so highly of their language that they can just name things the pier and the balloon and the bicycle, but because it's in their fancy schmancy foreign language, it sounds like a real title.
You could be watching this movie and thinking about, fuck does this have to do with a pier?
Exactly.
A lot of it takes place underground.
And usually when you get those one-word titles in the U.S., it's like some shitty direct-to-video movie. When was the last time you saw a movie that was a one-word title that was good? Think about it. You've got The Pier.
The Brutalist? I watched that
But see, that's
3
an
weeks ago.
interesting word. That's not like the
It is an
truck.
interesting word. It's not like
The house.
The house. Yeah. It would be like us naming a movie Boat.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I get it.
But when we read it as a title here in the States, it's La Jetée.
Oh, it's fancy.
Yeah. But then we'll take the same movie and name it 12 Monkeys.
Definitely more engaging and provocative.
Exactly.
I am insane, and you are my insanity.
If a complete misdirect, which is not what La Jetée is, it really is about that pier.
Yeah, that is true. But it is really surprising, folks, if you do go out there and find La Jetée and take the 28 minutes it is to watch it. It's surprising how much of that 12 Monkeys actually takes.
Yeah, a substantial chunk of it.
They almost couldn't get away without based on the short film, you know? I mean, it's really close, and I was honestly pretty surprised.
Yeah. This movie tied at number 67 on Sight and Sound's 2022 list of the greatest films of all time, and the only short film to make the list.
Gosh. Greatest of all time?
Of all time. This is a wildly experimental, unique, and for the time period, very heady science fiction film. You know, especially listening to this show, I think we take things like time loops for granted. It's like, well, obviously there are time loops.
Well, and why should a clock not go backward? Why should not time itself turn and retrace its course?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
a story like this in 1962 was really a novelty, I think.
Yeah, probably. Certainly early in the development of this kind of thing.
And especially told in the manner in which it's told.
Whoa, wait a minute, Doc. Are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
Precisely.
So La Jetée, 1962, written and directed by Chris Marker, who, despite his name, is French. Today, a boy sees a beautiful woman at an airfield overlook, and a man collapses in front of her. The boy's recollection of this moment remains vivid into adulthood. Tomorrow, Paris is leveled during a catastrophic war. Hoping to secure the means of mankind's survival, a team of German scientists experiment, yes, with time travel. Their subjects, culled from prisoners being held underground, are unable to endure the process, which results in a mix of disappointment, failure, and madness. One man, whose capacity for vividly recalling the past has made him uniquely capable of wrestling with the violent shift in setting that time travel requires, is able to fulfill the team's objective. First, going to the past, where he fosters a relationship with a familiar young woman, and then the future, where he meets advanced beings who provide the key to mankind's survival. The only question that remains for this man is, what comes next? His work done, he's slated to be executed by his captors. And while he may be able to avoid this fate, perhaps the end of his story is something he's known all along. That's La Jetée, man. And now I watched this thing a couple of times.
Yeah.
Obviously. It's deeply interesting to me, though. This movie is fascinating.
It is. By the time I could actually get myself through it,
28 minutes.
I gained a You'd think it would take 28 minutes. I did gain an appreciation.
It's sort of like an
for
audiobook. It is sort of like an audiobook with pictures.
Yeah, I'm going to say this is probably the most difficult content consumption that I've had since The Clock That Went Backwards.
Because since you had to read a story.
I had to read some stuff, and I mean, that's fine. But I don't know if I was just super duper tired, but I fell asleep during this thing twice without getting through it. What I ultimately did, and you know, this is a fault of the viewer, not the movie, but what I ultimately did, I had to turn the sound off of it and literally just read it, because I think the music and that guy's kind of monotone French narration was just lulling me to sleep.
It really does. It really is sort of hypnotic. And just to, well, two things. One, if you have not seen this film, you can watch it, to my knowledge, in one of two ways. One, it's on YouTube, which is how you watched it, right?
I actually found a better copy on Vimeo. It was a little clearer.
Right.
But yes, it's available free online if you just kind of search it.
And then on the Criterion channel. The Criterion has released a physical copy of this as well.
Did, Brian?
Paired with one of the director's other movies. What's up?
I looked for a dubbed version.
I watched it dubbed.
Wait, what?
It's on the Criterion channel, it's dubbed. Yeah, it's not in the original French. The only part of it that's not dubbed...
Did you watch it in the original French?
No, I don't know fucking French.
But I read the subtitles. I watched this.
I didn't read shit.
What?
I listened to the man talk. Did you watch this in French?
Yes, I did. I couldn't find one that's in English. I just want to shout out
to the Criterion channel for making this available in English.
God damn.
No wonder you kept falling asleep.
No wonder I kept falling asleep. That guy, the French dude was...
Ceci est l'histoire d'un homme marqué par une image d'enfance. La scène qui le troubla par sa violence et dont il ne devait comprendre que beaucoup plus tard la signification eut lieu sur la grande jetée d'Orly quelques années avant le début de la Troisième Guerre mondiale.
I do believe it's the same narrator.
Well, how do you know you didn't watch it in French?
Well, because, I mean, there's only one narrator credited.
In both copies?
And he also sounds French. Everything's a little bit snootier. The boy looked on the pier.
Is that? Did he really have like
a... digits.
Did he have an accent like that? Like a French?
There was not. It wasn't quite like that. No, but... I'm sorry. So yeah, watch it on the Criterion channel. You don't have to watch subtitled unless you're into that sort of thing.
I'd be surprised. I wonder how many of our listeners out there have a subscription to the Criterion channel.
Every one of you should have a subscription to the Criterion channel. It's delightful, and it's one of the few streaming services that is actually working towards the preservation of legitimate cinema. Let's just say that. I'll get off my high horse now.
I was going to say, as long as that lasts, thank you, Captain America.
Right. But yeah, it almost doesn't matter whether you watch it subbed or dubbed. None of the characters in this movie actually talk. All of the dialogue is voiceover narration.
Right.
It's kind of narrating what's going on in, very interestingly, still shots. The whole movie is just a sequence of static images. The airport, Paris in ruins, the underground, and that's fucking creepy as shit, let me tell you what. The scientists and the time travel hammock that is utilized in this movie, and then the traveling back in time. Almost the entire movie plays out in still frame.
Yeah.
You look at it first and it's a little bit jarring, but as you're watching it, you realize how important the editing and the sound design are in this movie as you're sitting there watching it. It's not like a slideshow where every image is on the screen for the same amount of time.
Right.
And despite the fact that you're seeing static images, there are still incidental sounds. Like you hear the German scientists muttering and talking, and you can't make out what they're saying, whether you speak German or not. And it leads to this just sort of, I don't want to say propulsive, because it's not the kind of narrative that grabs you and carries you from scene to scene. but it is an experience that you have a hard time looking away from, and you have this sort of underlying feeling of dread throughout. At least that's my experience watching.
I was going to say, the last time you mentioned it, you said it was very unsettling, and you were very uncomfortable, I think maybe is what you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't quite have that experience. What I did was I read the subtitles without any sound so that they wouldn't distract me, because the subtitles honestly come up really, really fast and go away really, really and yes, I'm a slow reader, but that wasn't the point. The point was it was like up there for like 2 seconds. So I was literally like stopping it and reading it like a book. And then I went back and just watched the images after I already kind of knew what the story was. A little interesting roundabout way to view the movie, but the thing that I think struck me the most was just how much 12 Monkeys actually lifted, with the exception of the Third World War.
Instead of a plague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And soon afterwards, Paris was blown up.
And the only other different thing about this is that the lead character travels into the future eventually.
That's true, yeah.
You feel like the experimentation in 12 Monkeys, for as ramshackle as it seems, the scientists and the tech team that are behind Bruce Willis traveling back in time are confident that, to an extent, their technology works. This team, it's a lot of trial and error.
They're confident, but but it doesn't really.
Just relax now, don't fight it. We're sending you to the third quarter of 1996, right on the money.
It doesn't really, but they are confident, right? Like, this team is very aware that what we're trying is experimental. We're trying this first, we're seeing if it holds, and then, if this works, we're going to send him into the future.
Yeah.
Right?
The prisoners were submitted to some experiments of great concern, apparently, to those who conducted them. The outcome was disappointment for some, death for others, and for others, madness.
That's the big difference. And the choice that the main character is given at the end of La Jetée is both different and similar to the choice that Bruce Willis tries to make at the end when he wants to be with Madeleine Stowe. Mm-hmm. Her character in the past. The man in La Jetée is kind of wrestling with the same feeling. He wants to go back to this woman, but it's really facilitated by these people from the future who have given him the option of like, hey, why don't you come here and live with us?
Yeah.
Eh?
That was kind of weird.
I think you could say that about any moment in this movie.
Yeah, most of the movie is pretty weird, but I'm not sure what he's attempting to say with that part of the story. The rest of the movie, it's all targeted towards the same thing, saving humanity, and more or less this person's struggling with these experiments and sending them back and coming back to the present and going back to the... And then the future people feel almost ancillary, like they kind of show
like
up
tacked
at the
on.
end. Yeah, they kind of show up at the end as though, how do I finish my story? You know what I mean?
And I think the German scientists who are developing the time travel method, that's always their end goal, is to send him to the future. The rationale here, the rationale shared by the people in the future, is that, okay, well, humanity obviously survives. So there is thus no harm in helping the past humanity survive. We made it. You guys are having a rough time. We're going to send you back with technology that will help you guys survive into the future.
But that's clearly going to change their entire reality. Why wouldn't there be like a temporal prime directive here that says...
I don't know if you noticed this, but they have stones in their forehead. You know what that means?
I thought they were like sewn on buttons or something.
They are obviously smarter than we are.
I mean, they're future people for sure. But if you're in the future and everything is hunky-dory, the answer would be there's no need to help this person. Because humanity's going to survive, and we all get here anyway. Unless he was always meant to time travel, and they were always meant to help him, and, that kind of closed loop situation.
Closed loop is what this movie's playing with.
Right.
Right. There's no wiggle room. Everything that happened. So that's definitely my read, with the one exception being the chance they offer him at the end to come to the future with us. And he's like, actually, I'd rather go back to the past
and be with
this chick.
Yeah, right before the start of World War III.
Right. Which is a choice. It's a choice.
It's a choice.
And soon afterwards, Paris was blown up.
The future part does seem a little distracting to me. And maybe it's solely because they didn't do it in 12 Monkeys and I'm trying to equate it so much. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's me.
It's also weird because when you first see these people from the future, and maybe this is just me, again, this is all still images. So the first thing you see are kind of these 4 half-silhouetted faces with the jewels on their foreheads.
Yeah, it looks like a Beatles album.
That's what I was going to say. It looks like the album cover to Meet the Beatles.
Sorry, I beat you to it.
It looks just like the Meet the Beatles album cover.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the only music analog I noticed with this. Because while the German scientists remain generally interchangeable and not really well defined, there's one of them that appears a couple of times.
With those weird glasses.
Yeah, he's also the one that appears on the pier at the end that's come to kind of hunt him down. And he looks like... You remember the Genesis video for Land of Confusion? The one with the puppets?
Not specifically, no.
Oh my God, one of the greatest music videos ever. Anyway, he looks like the Phil Collins puppet with the glasses on from that video. And I just kept thinking, oh my God, Land of Confusion. The Land of Confusion guy's here.
All of these characters, it is surprising the amount of life that the actors give each of these characters when it's just still frames. It's just photographs. Yeah. And the actors, just in these images, or I guess maybe the photographer would be the one that's really bringing these images to life. But
sure,
I mean, maybe it's part of your human nature to kind of connect things and turn them into a flowing story. But there really is, like, at some point you forget that you're watching still images.
Yeah.
You get used to it.
Kind of speaking of the hypnotic aspect of this, I think that's best on display when the main character starts being sent back in time. And here's where I drew a parallel to another movie. But the man travels back, and then he's pulled back to the future, and then they pump him full of drugs again, and he goes back into the past again. And he keeps fading in and out of this woman's life. Not unlike the time traveler's wife. Right?
Yeah.
The story goes that she kind of sees him once in a while and their relationship becomes stronger and stronger, culminating in that sort of museum date that they have together.
Right.
But that's where the movie's at its most hypnotic. There's a series of images of them walking through the park together. And then there's kind of series of images of her just kind of in bed. And there's a series of images of them in the museum together, just kind of walking around. And you see such a look of wide-eyed wonder on her face. And it's not even reacting to him being from the future. It's just about her being around in this pre-war time, looking around at the things around her, whether they are in the moment, whether they're historical artifacts in the museum. And then embedded in the middle of all of that is the only dynamic shot in the entire movie where you actually see her move. And according to the internet, the reason for that is because it was the one day he had a camera.
Part of me does wonder how much of this experimentation was necessity.
Yeah. Oh, I think most of it was probably.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it works in the movie's favor. If this had just been a standard kind of movie where you're watching them walk around, but it's accompanied purely by voiceover narration.
But why would it be? If you had actors, they wouldn't do the narration thing.
Would there be dialogue in this movie? I mean, you're looking at a totally different movie at that point.
Yeah, at that point, you're like if you have a camera that actually captures motion,
it's totally different.
You could probably make a talkie.
It's really interesting because the one shot in the movie where she smiles and blinks, and that's it. That's the only motion in the whole thing. And I don't know if it was like me, I had to like rewind it and be like, did I just see that or did I make it up?
Yeah.
Because my brain is so accustomed to seeing these still images now, and it just becomes such an interesting anchor point, a focal point for this movie.
And she needs to be at the focal point. I'd assume it would be very deliberate Although the choice to go still frame with everything else, I really have some question as to whether it was necessity for some reason. Kevin Smith's Clerks was filmed in black and white, and he got all kinds of credit for choosing black and white. Oh, because it's supposed to be like the security camera. And then you're just kind of peering in on these people, but it was just that was cheaper.
Yeah.
And it just kind of made it look artsy to be in black and white, and suddenly you get some kind of kudos for this choice that you've made out of necessity.
Yeah, maybe Chris Marker was like the French Kevin Smith of the 1960s.
Maybe. Either way, whether he was working with limitations, that's not necessarily a drawback.
Yeah, I mean, despite the fact that you fell asleep a couple times in a 28-minute span, I think this movie is arresting. It holds your attention well, and there is a narrative momentum to it that is assisted by the editing of those individual images. And the moment where it really starts to click into place for me, I mean, obviously the very beginning of the movie with the reflection of the boy remembering the moment on the pier at the airport immediately gives way. This is one of the most jarring things I've ever seen in a movie, where it's like, shortly after, Paris was blown up. Is what the narrator says. And it's like a minute and a half of just shots of wartime devastation. The score music is haunting. It's a lot of chanting. It's like upsetting. I don't know.
Some of those ruins and things that were blown up are like monuments that are still standing.
I think they were photos from World War II. Personally, that's what I think it probably was. Because, I mean, World War II was less than 20 years old at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth noting that this movie is coming out at a time where nuclear tensions are new and I wanted to say at their peak, but I feel like, you know, we can do better. We can definitely do better with nuclear tensions. I think we might.
Yeah, I think ultimately we do, you know?
But the specter of war is still very fresh in everybody's mind, right? A first-hand war in France. So one of my favorite lines in this whole thing, and there are a lot of really, really good lines in the narration here, talking about the war.
The victors stood guard over a kingdom of rats.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite, too.
Holy shit.
That was the one line I was going to make note of, but thanks for that. You stepped on my...
I mean, look, it's just great. It's an undeniably great line. And
yeah, it's a good line.
12 Monkeys is like 2 hours and 10 minutes long or whatever, right? And this is 28 minutes long. The efficiency with which this story is told really boils down to, in a lot of ways, the voiceover narration. Because the victors stood guard over a kingdom of rats immediately gives way to the tunnels under Paris, where these scientists and these prisoners are, and immediately into the crux of the story where we're like, okay, let's experiment on time travel.
Right. Well, a couple of things about that. First of all, that line, what a better way to say there are no victors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no victors in war. So people that you could consider as the winners of this travesty are stuck underground in a kingdom of rats.
Right. They have nothing either. Yeah. Great job,
There
everybody.
are no winners in war. Secondarily, though, something I probably should have brought up with 12 Monkeys, and maybe I did now that I think about it, but the idea that humanity is trapped underground.
The survivors settled beneath Chaillot in a network of galleries.
I'm confused where they get the resources to continue research into time travel.
Well, you've seen what they have to work with.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like, they've got to be struggling at finding something to eat and survive under there. And somehow they have the time and wherewithal to experiment with time travel, a thing that is theoretically impossible.
Yeah.
I don't know.
These are paperclip scientists, you know, like Operation Paperclip, where all the German scientists were brought over to work on various government projects.
Right.
They are all German. And something else that's different between this and 12 Monkeys that I thought was kind of interesting and kind of harkens back to the movie we covered last time, My Old Ass, is that there's nothing mechanical about the time travel method here.
Yeah.
It's all drug-based.
I had to eat like 3 pounds of my girlfriend's friend's weed to get here. Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is.
Finding the resources It's less about finding component parts and more about, let's see if we mix this shit together. Is it going to work?
Yeah, but you still have like
How much weed have you
unsterilized
given him?
needles and
Did you give him enough weed?
What are where are they getting these chemicals underground to
Nothing
make a
looks
concoction of medicines?
Sure. Nothing looks clean. Nothing looks well protected. They've obviously sorted out a method, and maybe they did this even before the catastrophe that ended the world, because the problem that they're presented with isn't the methodology at all, it's the patient.
Yeah.
It's finding the right subject, because all of their subjects can't handle it. To me, it's kind of like the Weapon X project in the comics. They have this plan. Yeah, we're going to put metal all over their skeleton, and none of the subjects could do it. And then here comes Wolverine with his healing factor, and they're like, oh, hey, well, that worked.
Yeah.
Like, never even occurred to me that it's like they don't have the resources, or it could be hard to get the resources they need to actually create the conditions.
I just think moving underground as a whole is typically a bad idea. Like, how do you...
It's got some merits.
Go
live down near the Earth's core where it's still warm.
Yeah, right. Like the Matrix or some shit. Like, all these post-apocalyptic worlds where people moved to underground. Like, where underground? That's like solid rock down there, people.
There's like cities down there, cities that they paved over or whatever. And the actual tunnels that they're in this movie, it's a real thing.
It's like the catacombs, yeah.
Yeah. So those tunnels existed. I mean, if you're going to have to live underground in a city, Paris is one of the better ones. Rome, also probably pretty good. A lot of catacombs there.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like a lot of post-apocalyptic movies have people moving underground.
They're all copying this.
Not like you can live down there. I don't get it. Unless you're subscribing to like Hollow Earth theory, but then you got to run into like skull crawlers and shit.
Yeah. One important thing to note about this movie is you never really see anybody eating food.
No.
Just saying.
That's the other thing.
I'm
like,
just saying.
And excrement, you get a bathroom corner. I am interested to know the logistics of living underground as a human society.
Sure.
How does anybody see anything? Where are they getting their electrical power?
Oh, they're all going to look pasty. Did you ever see The Descent? That horror movie? About the girls who go spelunking and they find these, like, inbred cave people?
No, I have not seen that movie.
Great fucking movie, but I mean, they get very pasty is all I'm saying.
You'd have to have some kind of source of light and or power. Anyway, this is not what the movie is about.
It's not even remotely what it's about.
No, not even.
It's not. The process is one of the coolest things this movie underscores, though, because it constantly gives you benchmarks like, okay, here's where he is on the 10th day, and here's where he is on the 16th day, and on the 50th day, and things like that. And it takes time for him to really acclimate to what they're forcing him to do.
Yeah.
And every time you see him in their present time, he's, again, laying in that hammock. He's got that weird kind of foam mask on. He's got
those
tubes
weird
kind of going in.
or something they put on his face. Yeah.
Like, it's so the opposite of what you're conditioned to expect time travel to look like. This really looks like two people in a garage just started hooking needles to you. And now you're traveling through time. It's got that.
Yeah, they literally have you hanging in a hammock.
Yeah. And he's wincing, and, like, obviously some of the times he comes back, it's very jarring and violent.
Yeah, I mean, it specifically says he doesn't die, he suffers.
At first, nothing else but the stripping out of the present. They start again. The man doesn't die, nor does he get mad. He suffers. They continue.
Yeah.
It's clearly not a pleasant situation for him. The reason he's a good candidate is because he's stuck on an image from his past.
To wake up in another time meant to be born again as an adult. The shock would be too much. Having sent only lifeless or unconscious bodies through different zones of time, the inventors were now concentrating on men with very strong mental images. If they were able to conceive or to dream another time, perhaps would they be able to live in it. The camp police spied even on dreams. This man was selected only because he was glued to an image of his past.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, when you're talking about adamantium skeletons or whatever and being the perfect subject for that, the reason that people are not able to acclimate themselves to time travel, they describe it as being born again into a new environment. And if you're unable to exist mentally in two locations, you can't handle time travel. And this person has such an obsession with something that has happened in his past,
that singular moment,
that he basically lives in that moment as much as he does in the present. So his mind is already capable of existing in two times.
I am mentally divergent. Are you also divergent, friend?
That's a really heady thought when you're just coming up with stories, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like you kind of take something like that for granted, or just nowadays it might be a throwaway line in a big action-packed sci-fi blockbuster or something, like a nugget of a good idea in some kind of bigger movie. But when you think about 1962, somebody really thought about this. Who comes up with that idea when they're talking about an ideal candidate for time travel?
Think of all the methods of time travel we've seen. And I would say
like the Christmas clock.
Well, even the Christmas clock. I mean, at least there's like something inherently time-based about it, right? The Christmas clock, the clock that went backwards, those come from the same place, right?
Yeah.
I can adjust the dial on this device and it will take me somewhere. The time machine, the H.G. Wells time machine, which had kind of that big dial on the back of it that also implied a clock, right? That sort of device, which gave way to things like the DeLorean. You kind of have this preconceived notion of what time travel is going to look like. And if you trace it back to its roots, even back then, what H.G. Wells did seems, okay, well, that seems pretty obvious. What we're doing in La Jetée does not seem obvious to me as a method of time travel. It seems weird and avant-garde. We were just talking last week. Yeah, but you're consuming mushrooms to travel through time? How weird is that? You know, but it's like, it's kind of a variation on what we're seeing here.
It is a little bit, yeah. The difference between the two is clearly that time travel in My Old Ass is facilitating something she needs to have happen in a story.
It's very circumstantial. It's not something that can be experimented or replicated necessarily.
And it's not even really the point.
Right.
Nobody's there for science fiction, right? Whereas this one, the story revolves around the fact that the protagonist is a time traveler. So you clearly, when you were coming up with this story, put some effort into thinking about, okay, well, what's my method of time travel here? And to go with something like this is really kind of out of the box. It makes me wonder if, again, were he not working with still images, what's the special effect that you use to indicate that somebody injected with something time travels? Is it like a situation where the body doesn't necessarily leave, but the consciousness time travels?
Yeah.
Does the body actually physically disappear because it's been injected with something, but then how does it come back?
It seems to me, and again, it's just how it appears based on what the movie provides, is that the body almost exists in two places at once.
He's in both photographs.
And he's wearing the same clothes. He's got like this
the clothing
button-up
goes
shirt
too,
that's
huh?
like the button-up shirt and like a concert tee. You know? He looks just like a dude on the street.
Yeah.
Which I guess works well when he travels back into the past because he fits right in.
Yeah. Maybe they dress him up that way. Well, shit, his clothes go. They can't even do that in Terminator.
Your clothes. Give them to me. Now.
Fuck you, asshole.
That's true. You could say maybe it's just his consciousness and maybe what he's experiencing in his mind is the past. Like maybe his mind is traveling almost. Kind of like source code, right?
Right. Yeah. Except source code, he was in someone else's body physically.
Yeah, but it's still happening in his head, right? It's not so much a legitimate, you're traveling back to a physical space in the past. But this movie is obviously telling us that he is traveling back to a physical space in the past, right? Yeah. In La Jetée, he's definitely traveling back because his younger self already saw it.
Right. And in source code, he was also traveling back. Go back and listen to that episode, folks. He affects the future. Anyway,
That's
that
true.
notwithstanding.
That's true. He does.
Good movie. That one's also a good movie.
Yeah, really good.
At this point, we're having a conversation about it. How long ago was this? 1960? What is that, like 80 years ago?
No, it's like 60 years ago, but,
Yeah.
63 years.
Give or take 2 decades.
Yeah. What is that, like 100 years ago or something? Get out of here,
like that.
Grandpa.
But we're still talking about it, and it's a testament to the time that the director put into thinking about this story.
It's not surprising why this inspired other things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right? It's like kind of the perfect template for that. It commands attention and everything in it is begging you to explore it further.
Yeah.
You want to see more and you want to understand more of what's going on every step of the way in this thing. And it's not to say that what you see in La Jetée feels incomplete. It does not at all. The movie introduces and resolves everything that's brought up by the narrative.
Yeah, but it's also kind of like the narrator telling the story of some kind of experience that they had. If you were to see this story, it would clearly be longer than it is, but it's just basically just kind of somebody summarizing a movie.
I love the very end when the man gets back to the pier and he's running to see the woman, but the scientist from the future murders him. And then the voiceover is like, and it was at that moment that the boy realized he saw himself be killed as an adult. The end.
Once again on the main pier at Orly, in the middle of this hot pre-war Sunday afternoon where he was now able to settle down, he thought in a confused way that the child he had been was due to be there too, watching the planes. But first of all, he looked for a woman's face at the end of the pier. He ran towards her, and when he recognized the man who had trailed him since the camp, he knew there was no way out of time. And he knew that this haunted moment he had been granted to see as a child was the moment of his own death.
It was like the end.
Right.
Right.
Like, let the audience come to that conclusion.
So quick.
See,
it's like, whoa!
That's maybe the disadvantage. If the entire movie is narrated to you, there's just somebody telling you the story, you can't come into any realizations on your own.
That's true.
That's kind of a drawback.
And 12 Monkeys definitely gives you that opportunity. It kind of nestles
For
you
sure.
into
Yeah,
that.
it
It feels a
definitely
lot
does.
more like you've come full circle on a journey, whereas this is a short story getting you from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And then back to point A.
Yeah. Hate to bring up Millennium again.
Those words will be engraved in the annals of understatement.
But when you talk about a story wanting to expand, Millennium started as a short story that became a novel, that became a movie script. It feels like this short has so much potential to become something like 12 Monkeys that it's a little surprising that the director left it at what it was.
Like, didn't try to make it more. Yeah, I
I wonder.
disagree with that.
It makes me wonder what the behind-the-scenes aspects of this story are, because I'm very curious to know what the limitations were. What were his goals in doing this? What was his expectation of the reception to the movie? All kind of interesting meta stuff.
This was pretty well acclaimed when it came out, and it won awards.
Top 100
of the Sight and Sounds list, yeah. And it's not like that's new. In their previous list, it was like number 50. So it's been on the list for a while.
Okay.
I feel like he probably made this and was like, all right, I said what I wanted to say with it, and I'm going on to do other things now. Like, this is just sort of like the launching pad. Because it is really low budget. If you were to make this movie today, it would cost you $10 in an afternoon. You know what I mean?
It does look like that. And that's where it benefits from just being a still frame show, essentially. This is a very interesting topic. It's a very interesting story. A lot of great ideas in there that, top 100 movies that's a far cry for me.
Well, it's
that's
tied
a bit
at
of
number
a stretch.
67 right now. So there's other movies that are just like as good as
I know.
The movie it's tied with is The A-Team.
That's funny.
No.
That's good. Good callback.
It makes sense. It would make sense, though.
But I don't see this making a top 100 list of mine. I can't. Nowadays, this would be a proof of concept.
Yeah, you're right. This is basically a storyboard. It's like an animated storyboard.
Exactly.
I don't know much about Chris Marker's work, and I am definitely interested to see some of his other projects. So I want to go and watch some
I'm
of his other
interested to
movies
see if he had other
back.
projects.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he did.
What else did he do? Feature-length stuff?
French stuff. Yeah, he did. He did. He went on to do some feature-length.
The car.
The sandwich. The baguette. But I do want to kind of check out his other stuff and see where his style and sensibility went from here and how much of this project is reflected in later stuff. I'm interested to see that. But as far as just general ideas go, breaking away from the mise-en-scène or the cinema aspect of this project, just looking at it narratively,
yeah,
it's obvious why it's influential. It's obvious where other concepts came from. And I don't know that there was any other, like, obviously Clock It Went Backwards is a closed loop also.
Mm-hmm.
But something that dealt with life and death the way this does so explicitly.
Yeah.
I wonder if something like that existed before this.
I don't know, but if I were to wager a guess, just from being a writer myself, I feel like the germ of the idea was probably, what if I witnessed my own death?
Yeah.
I bet that's where it started, and then the rest of this kind of grew out of it.
All fiction springs from existential dread and thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just sort of this, like, a concept.
That's where the Bible came from. Somebody one day was like, what if Dad was really, really mad at me?
and was
the next thing you know,
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really believe it. It's probably just the outcome of the environment that the author-director was in. He had this one concept. This was the world he was living in, just following World War II and the nuclear age, and everything kind of extrapolated from there. It's my working theory. I have no evidence to that at all. But
if you're going to build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
I think before we move on, though, we got to rank the time travel method here.
Okay. So I have too many questions for it to be real high.
Too many questions. There's too many questions. There's just too many.
Now, I know 12 Monkeys was up there last season. It was way up there, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it looks so fucking weird.
Yeah,
you know?
it was all
just
weird.
Like, and that was very mechanical.
You didn't have the same questions that I have now because they put him in that hole. They put him in the hole in the wall, and he just kind of disappears.
Yes.
Right? So, like, he's like...
As one does.
Clearly... but he's clearly physically gone.
We didn't ask the questions because we didn't have the questions to ask yet. Like, this is all very new to, I don't know, humanity, thinking about things in this kind of way. I guess. I don't know. Is it visually interesting? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I understand how it works? No. Would I want to do it myself? Absolutely not.
Right. It clearly is
like,
agonizing.
This looks like one of the least pleasant methods of time travel I think we've seen.
Yeah.
Just visually, it's hard to look at. I think it looks very cool, but I feel like it probably belongs under the Millennium Time Portal. That's where I would put it.
Under the Millennium Time Portal. I mean, the guy's got a hammock, not a bed, right? So it's not even like the time machine can make his bed for him.
No. I mean, it's obvious nothing's getting made. Everybody's just as fucking filthy at the end of this movie as they were at the beginning.
You think they all sleep in hammocks? I bet the hammock doesn't have anything to do with it.
But the thing is, like, it's not even one of those laying down hammocks. It's just sort of like one of those half sitting up hammocks.
I don't think that the hammock is part of the time machine. I think they just happen to have this.
They just need to lay him somewhere.
Yeah.
It's and like if they put him on the floor, then they're crouching down, and that's not convenient for anybody.
So you said below the time portal?
Yeah, I put this right behind the Millennium Time Portal.
Okay, so that puts it just above suicide.
So next, we're going to move on to another big source of inspiration here. Nate was like, hey, what about Time Cop? Because we know that was based on a comic as well. Well, yeah, the initial Time Cop comic appeared in the first 3 issues of Dark Horse Comics anthology between August and October of 1992. And when Nate had this idea, I thought, what a great idea. And then it was like, where do we find it? Well, fortunately, within 24 hours of Nate floating the idea, I was able to secure the 3 issues in question from my local comic shop.
Good for you, man. Good for you and your shop. Give your shop a shout out.
Shout out to Seth Piegler specifically, and heroes aren't hard to find in Charlotte, North Carolina in general, for being able to find these comics and have them in my pull box before close of business that day.
Wow.
Real quick here, these 3 issues include a lot of licensed characters. And of course, Dark Horse had like the Predator and the Alien licenses back in the day. And so you get a lot of that. This second issue of Dark Horse Comics has a RoboCop image by Mike Mignola.
Oh.
Fucking incredible.
Oh, nice.
And the third issue has the first part of an Indiana Jones story in it. So there's all kinds of fun stuff in here.
That's awesome. Yeah, you get to read it in hand.
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to scan those in for me. I read them on the screen. And again, this episode, one of the more difficult times that I've had trying to consume the topic. I've read comics my whole life. I don't like reading PDFs on a screen, and I couldn't bring myself to use the color printer.
It's not right, Nate said.
I couldn't do it. It was a lot of pages.
It's a lot of ink. It is a lot of pages. What do we got, like 24 pages or something?
Yeah,
I
it's
think
a full comic book.
Yeah, it ends up being a full issue of comics fun here. It's written by Mark Verheiden from a concept by Mark Richardson, and they collaborated later on the screenplay for the Time Cop movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme in it.
Yeah, go back and listen to our Time Cop episode.
Yeah, we've got it out there, guys. And the art here is done by Phil Hester, who went on to do a lengthy run on DC's Green Arrow.
Oh, okay.
And is just an overall cool-ass dude. I met him a couple years ago at Dragon Con. Really, really nice guy.
Is this early stuff of his?
Yeah,
or?
This is going to be early Phil Hester stuff. So his style is not completely defined yet. You can kind of see hints of it there, but you can also see kind of that 90s influence in there as well.
Yeah, it's definitely 90s.
Big old
Very
shoulder
clearly.
pads. Like laser guns, visors and shit, you know.
Is this before or after Cable?
This is after Cable.
The wild man of Borneo. See you around.
Yeah, so this is very inspired by Cable, I think.
Absolutely. And Cable obviously being one of the big comic time travel characters of the late 80s, early 90s, right?
Yeah.
So this definitely was tapping
Which we covered in our
that
X-Men
market.
episode. Go back and
That's right.
listen.
That's right. Time Fugitives.
This is really just an ad for all our other episodes.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is like the Avengers of Oh Boy episodes, where, man, it's really benefits you to know all the different characters and all the different episodes that led us to this point.
It's all connected, Brian.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa, wait a minute. Doc, are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
Precisely.
Time Cop, A Man Out of Time, serialized in Dark Horse Comics 1 through 3. Max Walker is an operative of the Time Enforcement Commission.
Max Walker.
I know, right? Read between the lines. He's tasked with chasing down time-traveling ne'er-do-wells. Haven't thrown that one out in a while. One such ne'er-do-well is John Adam Packer, who has traveled back to 1933 to rob a South African diamond mine. While Walker has pursued him, he was unprepared for the backup Packer brought with him, a Ramco security robot with, like, I don't know, like buzzsaws and shit on its arm.
So stupid.
It's
spoilers. Sorry.
It's your typical post-Terminator assassin time travel droid.
Yeah.
Walker defeats the robot, leaving it buried in a collapsed tunnel, and drags Parker's ass back to the future. And Nate, this is the point at which I want to ask you, what is the first rule of time travel?
The same matter can't occupy the same space at the same time. It's in the technical reports. However, it's never happened.
Don't leave anything behind?
Exactly. Don't leave future shit just laying around where it can be found or, I don't know, reactivated. It was true in Back to the Future 2. It was true in Millennium, and it's true here. And it turns out this robot left in 1933 was still operational and has damaged the timeline. So Walker has to return to 1933 to clean up the mess and, in the process, evidently end apartheid. So, wild story here. Wild little journey we go on here in this peak 90s comics. Goodness.
Yeah, peak 90s. Man, what do you think of this outfit on this guy?
Let's just say I am glad they changed it for the film adaptation.
Holy crap, yeah.
Shoulder pads, it's a lot of browns.
They're those weird shoulder pads that are on the outside of people's clothes, you know, like Cable wears, and like lots of superheroes were doing at this time where it's like, what is it?
You know the Marvel character Solo? Who's like a vigilante in the Spider-Man? He looks like Solo. Like it's the same color scheme, it's the same kind of look. Very Solo-esque. Not to be confused with the Mario Van Peebles film Solo.
Which it also looks like. No, you know, it's hard to hate on it now, though. Like, I'm sure in 1990... When did this come out?
92.
Yeah, see, in 92, this is the shit, right?
Yeah. Like, you're taking this comic to school, and you're like, look at this fucking cool-ass robot with the buzzsaws.
I did read this kind of once and a half.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of like, did I really get all of that? So I had to read it again.
There's not a lot to this one.
That's why I wondered if I got it all the first time.
What this story really comes down to is...
You won't understand it any better than I can.
It's a diamond heist story playing out over time. And Parker goes back to steal this big diamond. There's a character... What's his name? M'Batu or something?
Joseph M'Batu.
Yes. That ends up with the diamond in 1933. And then when Walker has to go back, the diamond becomes sort of a plot device in terms of defeating the robot, right? Because it's this sort of indestructible material.
I like how it's already cut.
Yeah.
It's a diamond, but it's like clearly cut by a jeweler.
It's like perfectly like symmetrical sides and everything. And then it gets burst into pieces there at the end. I mean, diamond is diamond, baby. And that's what M'Batu finds out. But
like, you have to draw it the way an audience would understand that it's a diamond.
Right. It can't look like that thing from Uncut Gems. That like sparkly gemstone that's kind of covered in rock and shit.
Yeah, right. The jeweler has clearly gotten to this and placed it back in a mine where slave labor is digging out diamonds.
Yeah.
I think largely this is somewhat underwhelming. Probably one, because we saw Time Cop.
Time Cop is demonstrably better than this story is.
Oh, it's so good. I really enjoyed Time Cop.
Although I will hand this story one thing over Time Cop, and I'll get to it in a second. But
okay. They don't seem to do anything interesting with the fact that he is a time cop.
Right.
He goes back, he makes an arrest in a third of a comic book, and then the rest is just like fighting a robot.
It really is just the punchline, I think. Where you find out due to a newspaper headline that apartheid ended like 30 years earlier than it did in reality, right?
Yes, right.
Which was incidentally about the same time this comic was coming out. that was happening, right?
Yeah, that's ballsy right there.
Yeah. It's a political statement. It seems a little pedestrian to us now. It was bold back then.
When I noticed that, I thought, well, is there a historical figure that I'm unfamiliar with? Like, is this M'Batu a real person? And so I just kind of Googled the name. This is an entirely fictional character for this specific comic book. I found on Collider under the headline, Time Cop left out the most interesting parts of the comic it's based on. What? Which I'm like, what?
He wrote that for an audience of one.
Yeah.
Mark Verheiden's out there somewhere like, finally.
Yeah.
Someone who gets it.
The only reason I bring this up is because I kind of skimmed the article just to see, And, quote Collider, Walker's effect on time travel produces a net positive by helping M'Bato operate on a similar level to the gag that is used in the original Back to the Future. Chuck Berry hears Marty McFly playing Johnny Be Good at the school dance, inspiring Berry to create the rock and roll music. However, unlike the bootstrap paradox presented by Back to the Future, Walker's actions in 1933 helped end apartheid decades earlier. What's similar to the gag in Back to the Future?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
They ended apartheid by 30 years.
I'm not sure. It's like, because here's the thing. I don't think Walker gave M'Bato the idea to end apartheid.
No, didn't. It's not even close.
I think they all would have liked to have ended it earlier. It's just that nobody had a diamond. That is wild. That is a wild take.
It's ridiculous. So, the character ended apartheid.
Like Back to the Future.
Yeah, oh my God, horrible.
But a good point here is that it's funny that Walker leaving the robot in the past caused damage to the timeline, but something like that didn't cause damage to the timeline, something that had this global implications. I mean, because let's be honest, Nate, this Ramco security robot was not going to be overthrowing any world governments. This thing is dumb as a fucking post.
Yeah, it really has one thing in mind, and that's let me get you with my buzzsaw.
Saw.
Yeah, right.
He punches through a guy at one point, though. I think I should also point that out. He does punch through a man's stomach.
Definitely stabs a guy. I think that because the comic book ends with that final image where you learn that M'Bato goes on to battle apartheid, right?
Yeah.
And it's really just kind of like I won't say a throwaway, but it's a newspaper headline.
Yeah. And it's because his character just died at 92. That's why it's appearing in the newspaper. It's not that Joseph ended apartheid 40 years ago. He's just died.
And the only way you find out is random guy is reading newspaper. Who is that that's reading the newspaper at the end?
Oh, I don't think it doesn't matter. I think that single image is a clever way to end it. You mentioned, why is this a time travel story? I think that maybe the only panel that makes it worth its merit as a time travel story.
Yeah.
Is just getting that little nudge at the end. It's just kind of that little nugget you're left with.
Yeah, but the problem is...
But it is just some rando.
Look, I mean, I have worked within the constraints of trying to keep something within 24 pages. We did these little ashcan comics that got us our job at Tokyo Pop. And it was okay, we're going to tell single issue stories. And they're not easy to do, working within that kind of time frame, especially with the pacing that you want to use with your art. Art these days in comics, the pacing is so well done with the progression of your panels. How big are your panels? How small are your panels? How many panels are there? There's a real art to how big you keep your gutters and things like this. I don't mean to get into the nitty gritty of putting together a comic book precisely, but the fact of the matter is, it's fairly clear that they were squeezing this thing into 24 pages. And the punchline to the story is this newspaper headline of just some guy, just some random person, from what I can tell, in the very last panel of the very last page is reading a newspaper. But the reason I bring it up is there's no background in that panel. There's no setting or anything. It's just an opportunity to put text on a page.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating.
Looks to me like the guy works there.
Yeah, maybe it's the guy that's sitting at the computer in the background all the time.
Oh, maybe. I mean, he looks like he belongs in the office.
Maybe.
But I see what you're saying. Because the panel kind of ends before it gets to him, and it could just as easily be somebody who's somewhere else entirely.
It feels weird to say that time travel doesn't have a whole lot to do with it, because clearly his actions have huge ramifications on the time stream. But if you've got a story that you're going to call Time Cop, you'd expect the story to be about time travel and like some kind of paradox that's being created or something that somebody's like.
So let's.
Am I making that clear?
Yeah,
it seems like at the end of the day, this is just like hero goes back and fights robot.
I want us to keep in mind one very important thing, and I'm glad you just said hero goes back in time and fights robot, Nate. What was going on in the world of entertainment when this comic came out?
1992.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. That is the reason this comic exists. Because everything else in here is RoboCop, Predator, Aliens, and then we got Time Cop nestled in there.
And this was an original concept, essentially.
It was, but
that's interesting that they'd put it in there with those licensed materials.
2/3 of this 3-issue anthology deals with Walker fighting the robot in the past.
Yeah.
This unstoppable killing machine. This exists because Terminator existed.
I definitely agree with you. So this isn't like a counterpoint of any kind, but it doesn't look anything like Terminator. It's like this weird...
Well, it can't. Legally, it can't, you know.
Well, you know what I mean, though. Like, it doesn't seem like it's trying to mimic the Terminator.
I get what you're saying.
It looks more like the Alien.
It does look like
robot
the Alien.
Form.
It's got that elongated head, kind of. It's a really, really
it's like
interesting...
a battle droid before battle droids.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know that I would call this good.
You're a smart boy. Why don't you sleep on it a while?
I guess what I'm saying, like, we're talking about how Walker kind of harkens back to some of the popular comic characters at the time. The plot, just the general bare-bones plot of a guy going back in time to chase a rogue killing machine from the future.
That he left there.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the Terminator analog kind of stops. It'd be like if Kyle Reese left a Terminator in 1984.
It's like, oops!
Right. But I just feel like this is a pastiche of a number of really popular ideas in the early 90s. Yeah. And they're trying to build something out of it. Maybe having a couple years between this and the movie really helped out a lot. Because Time Cop still... You see where it's coming
Time Cop
from.
Came out in 94, right?
Yeah. So a couple years after this.
So a movie probably takes about a year of development.
Yeah, how long do you think it took them to make Time Cop?
How long did they take to film Time Cop?
I'm going to say 20 days of shooting.
20 days? Come on.
But yeah, I mean, it was obviously already in production.
So yeah, like it was already going to be a movie by the time they published this.
Oh, maybe so.
Maybe? The movie has absolutely nothing to do with this story, mind you.
Other than Walker.
So, Agent Walker, you're going to Stain.
Max Walker.
And the fact that they even named him Max Walker and then later cast Jean-Claude Van Damme to play Max Walker.
Look, if I were Richardson and Verheiden and I was making this Time Cop thing and they said, hey, we got Van Damme for you, I'd be like, fuck yeah, we got Van Damme.
Yeah, absolutely.
Max Walker.
In 1994, you're damn right.
Yeah, that would have been thrilling. Oh, and we also got Sloane from Ferris Bueller. Can't do better than that. Can't do better.
You did. Yeah, and it's funny because when we did our Time Cop episode, the only thing that makes the aesthetic of that movie future is those dumb cars that have all that computer crap all over the outside of the car. Remember
Everything
that?
else looks like the mid-90s, and then this weird fucking car pulls up.
Yeah, it's just the 90s.
Well, that's better than what the comic does, because the only thing
that's
that
what I'm driving
the
at.
future in the comic are the shoulder pads.
Right, and these weird
It's
sunglasses.
well known in comics as a medium that the farther you get into the future, the more pronounced the shoulder pads become.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then he's got this weird Superman logo with what I guess is an hourglass in it.
Yeah, it looks like an hourglass, kind of.
I'm not sure I like that too much.
Okay, so there are some missteps here, design-wise. But in the 90s, like, all of this looked perfectly natural to us. You know, like, this is exactly the sort of design aesthetic that we were subjected to, for better or worse, in the early 90s.
But we liked it, too.
I mean, no, I
thought
I fucking loved it, man. This,
yeah.
Like, Again, I'm reading this for the first time now, but if I had discovered this in the 90s when it came out, I think I'd be into it.
Maybe.
And I'll tell you, the one page, 2 pages. There are 2 pages in here that really stand above all the rest for me.
Okay.
And that's the time travel itself.
You can't go forward because the future hasn't happened yet. However, you can go back, and that's where things get real tricky. It turns out if you go back and you change something, it's serious. It could be catastrophic. It's like throwing a stone in a lake, and it causes ripples in the water, only now they're ripples in time.
Yeah, I did want to talk about the time travel car, which makes an appearance here in the comic book.
And it makes a little bit more sense here than it did in the movie Time Cop 2, because...
Does it?
Yeah, because you bring the car back.
Well, the car goes back by itself.
We know what happens to the fucking car.
Like, you arrive in the car, and then the car disappears, and you get back without it.
Yeah, how does he get back? Hold on. I thought this... Oh, no, yeah, you're right. He gets back without it. He appears in this, like, kind of, like, energy...
Yeah, he just starts to disappear from the bottom up.
He says, that last step's a bitch. And there he is.
And then he's standing on some weird platform.
Yeah, sweet-ass, kind of Kirby-esque platform.
It makes way less sense in the comic.
All right, yeah, you know what? You forget it. It doesn't make less sense. But it still looks pretty cool.
I don't know, man. I feel like...
Here's what I love about it here.
Okay.
This 2-page spread I'm talking about.
Man, makes this so much better.
Well, it's because it's actually moving, I guess. And you see that sort of piercing of time, and that's kind of what sells it in the movie. But what you see on the page here is Walker is in the little rail car. It looks a lot like it did in the movie. Looks a little bit more like one of those, we're going to break the speed barrier test tracks that they would have set up in the desert in like the 1940s,
Maybe. To me, it looks like bumper cars.
A little bit. Okay, I could see that too. Walker here is thinking about his wife, who has evidently died or something bad has happened to her because he's shedding a tear. We don't find out anything more about that. Her name is Linda.
She died because you came back and made some changes.
So now you're gonna fuck with time. You're as bad as me.
Wrong. I'm setting it right.
Yep, that whole backstory. One panel.
Yeah. He says, Linda. And then they launch the car, and you really get a sense of the momentum here as the electricity builds around it. And his face goes from, like, rigid and stoic to looking like it's being torn apart.
Yeah. Like, they do that in the movie.
Yeah.
This is the one thing that they do pull from the movie, and it's actually like verbatim language, I think.
Yeah, this is my first real launch.
Great. Don't stick your head out of the window. She's a little shaky.
Blood pressure's gonna loosen her teeth, and her pulse is pushing 140.
She farts, she'll get ahead of the pod.
Yeah.
What's the line?
Is it?
Yeah.
Because that's what he says there. It looks like he's missing an eyeball. Wow, man, it looks rough. This does not look like a pleasant experience at all. And then he crashes into a tree immediately.
Right. And sends his car back or something. Like, I don't get it.
It says, once you're back, the pod's unnecessary. Time is like gravity. Takes muscle to blast you back. But once there, the natural pull returns you to the present.
Right. Yeah, it does say that.
So it does kind of explain why you don't need a car to come back.
Yeah, they mention it like a tennis ball, throwing a tennis ball in the air or something like that.
Yeah, yes.
Now that I'm reading it, I'm not sure if this is verbatim, but it's definitely the same idea. It says, maybe we should send someone down there to make sure Walker's still awake.
How's Walker?
You'd have to shake him to be sure he's still awake.
He's awake.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one scene that they take and put in the movie because when he gets in the car in the movie, he's got that nervous new rookie partner with him.
Oh, yeah.
And he's just kind of like super chill about getting in this time machine that goes crazy fast and splits your face apart or whatever. But that's the one thing I know that they lift. And yeah, he's got like a wife that died, I guess.
Something happened to her.
Yeah, and he thinks about her when he time travels, and it lowers his pulse to the point where he doesn't get stressed out about time traveling. So
Boy,
That's an interesting
I
idea.
can't imagine having a woman in my life that when I think about her, my pulse lessens.
Oh, man. Your wife doesn't listen to this,
She does not. No, she doesn't listen to this. I'm safe.
Perfect.
I'm good.
Yeah.
In the clear.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say about this is the captain and the people back at the TEC, which is the Time
Enforcement Commission.
Right, yeah. They're back there monitoring the waves of change to time.
It's like throwing a stone in a lake and it causes ripples in the water, only now they're ripples in time.
Like they're monitoring these things like it's not an instantaneous change for them.
Kind of like Team Quantum Leap, huh?
Well, either Team Quantum Leap or what I was thinking about again.
Sir, I have a time quake approaching.
Paradox. Time quake approaching. Force 3.
And
Millennium.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of like they feel the aspects of the changes that are being made and they can monitor and witness on a computer screen the representation of the changes that Walker is making in the past. I don't know if I like that. I mean, it's not like it's new. We've seen it before.
I think it's a cool visual. You know,
because Chrononauts does kind of the same thing.
Yeah, where it's like the timeline doesn't automatically realign. It doesn't automatically adjust. I don't know if I like one over the other. I think that's more to do with the overall story and how it's used. I'm thinking of like one of my favorite examples of the opposite is Yesterday's Enterprise, the Next Generation episode where they save the Enterprise C and suddenly everything on the bridge of the Enterprise D changes.
Yeah, like immediately.
And it gives you a mystery to solve that hour too, right?
Yeah,
like what could have gone wrong? What has just happened here and why has it led to this, you know? But it's like that makes sense in that story, right?
Right. Yeah.
For something like Time Cop, if the changes to the timeline were instantaneous, then the logical conclusion would be like, well, the TEC might not exist at all at this point. And that's not a can of worms you want to open, right?
You'd never know anybody was traveling in time.
Exactly. And it makes sense. I mean, for New Quantum Leap as well, like those sorts of changes, it's like you can't make it so instantaneous that it makes it impossible to reverse. And so you've got to have the project there in Quantum Leap, and you've got to have the TEC here in Time Cop, or it raises way too many questions that this particular story is not really designed to address.
Too many questions. There's too many questions. There's just too many.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that as a detriment or a slight at all. It's just like, this isn't the type of story they're trying to tell. This is trying to tell a rollicking adventure about a man dressed in shoulder pads who goes back in time to beat the shit out of a buzzsaw robot.
In 1933 in apartheid South Africa.
Yeah.
That's such a weird choice. It's a really weird choice for an action for your Time Cop.
It is kind of
Isn't
weird.
it?
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be something, I guess. And the movie does essentially the same thing with the opening scene with the gold and the
Well, I was just going to say
soldiers.
That's so much cooler to me.
It's also probably easier to shoot. I don't know. You know,
I mean,
it works.
I don't know.
It works. I think this works just fine. And if there had been more Time Cop stories in the comics, maybe this wouldn't stand out as being a little weird.
Yeah.
But no, this is all we got.
If you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
So, are we ranking this version of the Time Cop car?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because it's not on the same level that the film version is.
Is it more or less annoying that the car shows up and then goes away?
Right, like you don't arrive in the past in the car. You fall out of the sky like you fell out of the car.
Yeah.
Like we don't know what happens to the car.
Sense.
Like this,
as ridiculous as it is, it makes more sense in the movie.
I don't know. I think this makes more sense.
Really?
Because, I mean, at least it's explaining where the car went. It's like, oh, you don't need the car anymore. We brought the car back.
No, the car never leaves the track in the movie. When it
I get what you're saying.
When it gets to the end of the track, you have disappeared because it sent you through time.
It's like the car stopped and you kept moving. Like an object in motion stays in motion kind of thing, and you're kind of...
Yeah.
Okay, I get what you're saying, and I agree with you.
This is right around the time that Time Cop, the movie, came out. We were heading down to Heroes Con, and we were driving in my grandpa's Buick, and I remember we were having this kind of conversation about, like, what if the car were going at the speed of light, and then your seat moves forward, and then you are moving faster than the speed of light, and it sends you through time.
Okay. All right.
That's my take on it. But anyway, so I would put this... Oh, God. Where are we putting this? Drug-induced time slipping. Under the clock that went backwards.
Under the clock that went backwards.
Under drug-induced time slipping? Is it better than the Millennium Portal?
Yes.
It is?
I think it's better than the Millennium Portal. I mean, Portal, come on.
You hate that portal.
No, I don't. I like that it makes the... I look at it tidies up.
You back a plane up into
I have more questions about the Millennium Portal than I do about the Time Cop rail car.
Well, if you feel that strongly about it, then it's between drug-induced time slipping and the Millennium Portal.
Okay, yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, so Time Cop comic.
Oh, you know, one more thing I did want to mention about the Time Cop now that I think about it. Did you read Walker's dialogue in Jean-Claude Van Damme's voice when you're reading it? Did you hear his voice in your head?
I didn't. He doesn't look... He's so 90s comics. You know what he reminds me of? You remember the Tick cartoon, right?
Sure, yeah.
We've talked about it. You remember the Punisher analog guy, Big Shot?
Yeah.
None of them really know how to handle evil. This looks like a job for Big Shot.
That's who you remind you of.
I read it like that.
You know, I didn't think about it until there was a joke in part 2 where I suddenly realized, oh yeah, I am kind of reading this in his voice.
I feel like he uses words that Jean-Claude Van Damme probably couldn't pronounce.
It's when his captain says to him, Jesus, Walker, you're a laugh a minute. I'm surprised you don't have your own Thursday night sitcom. And his response was, funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you. And I was like, that is absolutely the sort of joke that Jean-Claude Van Damme would have made. None of those jokes landed.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
They were all like takes one to know one kind of jokes.
Yeah.
That's the moment where I was like, oh yeah, I am hearing his voice in this.
Yeah, that's brutal. That's terrible.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for listening to this episode. What do we got on tap next time? In keeping with the Origins trajectory here, somebody had the bright idea of reading the short story Air Raid, which I think was, Nate, on the episode where we talked about Millennium. We should really read that, I think you said, or did I say that?
No, I'm pretty sure I said it, and it's only 8 pages.
Only 8 pages!
Only 8 pages. I've got my copy printed out right here.
Of sweet, sweet text, guys.
Yeah, and I am going to read for the podcast again.
So Air Raid, the short story that inspired Millennium, we're going to be covering that on the next episode.
We've talked about Millennium so much that I feel like the name of this season has got to be something like The Old Millennium.
Louise Baltimore is early running to be MVP for this season, I think. Louise Baltimore's hair is going to be the MVP. But yeah, thanks for listening, folks. Remember to like and subscribe the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you never miss an episode. Hey, drop us a line if you're of the mind. OhBoyQLPod at gmail.com. Hey, you know what I'd really like to know, guys? What other podcasts do you listen to? Send us some information about the other shows you like. Are there other time travel shows you listen to? Or is it all true crime? I just want to...
It's usually true crime, right?
Just curious about your listening habits, guys. Let us know what you're into. Of course, when in the post-apocalyptic Parisian hellscape of social media, please do find us at Captain Bern, CaptainBern on Blue Sky, and I'm Brian.Lee.Martin on Threads and Instagram.
And I am at Action Nate on both Blue Sky and Threads.
Guys, as always, it's been a real pleasure. Until next time, I'm Brian.
And I'm Nate.
And we'll see you in the future.
Let me